Good afternoon. My name is Tony Cruz or T.Cruz. I'm a Lab Learning Action Buffet youth mentor and radio hour producer. Doña Ana Community College and the lab are partners on a Humanities Action Lab project funded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, among others, and coordinated by personnel at Rutgers University in Newark, New Jersey. Today, I'm joined by Allyssa Wright, a community organizer with Café Acción. Thank you, Alisa, for agreeing to be interviewed. Start off just telling us a little bit about yourself, your identity, where you were born, grew up, etc., and your role at Café.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Tony. So my name is Allyssa Wright or Alyssa, whichever way you would like to say it. I was born and raised in Las Cruces, and I grew up in a big family. So I have technically six siblings. So I grew up in a full house and definitely grew up with so much love and community within that, but also just really wanting to pursue my education. Since a lot of my family members didn't go to school, they didn't have the resources in order to do that within their community. So growing up, I definitely had a lot of drive to go to school, to want to be able to show my family that it could be done in order to do that. And so my role at Cafe is I'm a community organizer, and I specifically work with young adults and youth ranging from 15 to 24. And with that is that I've been doing a lot of just how do we get young people aggravated and motivated and like aggravated in a good way to see the problems in our society, but also how can we solve these? How can we work together to get that presence? Because even in working on the past election cycle, we saw that ages 18 to 35 in our community just they don't vote, they don't get out to vote, and it's because a lot of that education doesn't start when they're younger. And so that's kind of my role at Cafe as of now, of working with young adults, getting into spaces of power, into spaces to understand that they can have opinions on, take up that space, really be able to talk about things they care about, be in spaces of power, be in spaces and people with power that are there for us. And so providing that opportunity to more people. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear. I feel like a lot of the work that you do, and I guess I also do as a youth mentor for the lab, I've also like helped put kind of stuff together. And so I understand the I don't know if the word is struggle, but more of like the work, you know.
Yeah,
So that's really awesome. And you said how old are you again?
I'm 21.
You're
Yeah.
21? Wow. So like yeah, I'm 23, so like you beat me to it. Uh but no, that's really great to hear that, that youth, trying to get youth involved in a lot of this because yeah, like we're the ones that are going to be affected by anything that happens, like for the next 80 plus years, like we're the ones that are going to get the brunt of it. So might as well be the ones that are up front. Um, what are your hopes for the future in terms of the work you're doing?
I think my hugest hope is working, like getting people who are historically like they don't feel welcomed or they don't feel like they have the opportunity to be in these spaces. I originally got into the policy world when I was 15, actually working on some legislation about dyslexia, since I myself am dyslexic, to add accessibility for young people with disabilities in order to receive testing, because my parents, they had to go out of their way, pay lots of money, which like we most likely like did not really have that extra money to go to pay to get private testing. But in my family, we're so like family oriented, where my parents did it and they had those struggles. And so I think I really have the drive that every young person deserves accessibility in any spaces that they're in. And so within that, when I was younger, I realized how much these spaces aren't made for people of color, they aren't made for women, they aren't made for any individual that you identify differently than what our country was built on. And we see that these spaces are made to make us feel uncomfortable. They're made for us to not feel welcomed. And so I definitely, my hope is to be able to see that those diverse people really taking those spaces in the roundhouse, taking those spaces in city hall and areas where they can feel represented because we have diverse reps, but sometimes we don't have the people who are working on the legislation or advocating that are directly impacted. So I think my hope would be that young people just are okay with taking that space and okay in that uncomfortableness sometimes, because unfortunately it has to be uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
that is, it's not welcoming, it's not inviting, and it's frustrating to me as a person. But I think my hope would just be able to see more young people like myself and like you in those spaces to really know that there's those opportunities out there, and it doesn't have to just be for people who are excellent speakers or have high educations or have all these talents, because we all do. And so just really to empower people to do that. But yeah.
Yeah. That's great. Sounds like you've been doing like the work, even before you joined Cafe. That's really good to hear. Were you very like involved in like clubs and stuff in like high school, middle school, or how would you see yourself?
Yeah, I would say I definitely, growing up in a household where like education was like my top priority for my parents, my mom was a young mother with my oldest sibling, and so she kind of had a very different story growing up. So when she had me and my sister and my dad, my mom and dad were always like, your education is the first thing, because that's something no one can ever take away from you. And so that was something growing up that was really ingrained in me, that okay, no matter what I do in my life, no one can take away my degree. And so I think that is kind of motivated me through high school, sometimes a little bit too much. I think I definitely look back and now I tell younger people where I'm like, just like don't put that much pressure on yourself. It's gonna be okay. You're gonna be fine. I think I definitely, and I think like we often do this in like Mexican culture and Hispanic culture of just putting a lot of pressure on these things. And I think on myself, I was always like, I need to be the best. I need to be the best at this. When in reality, I was like, I was enough. Like it was good. Like I was fine. And so definitely growing up, I was very involved. I myself, like outside of work, was just in extracurriculars, like whether that was music, orchestra, like in my church and different things like that, being involved in the community those ways when I was younger. And I think I just definitely felt a strong strive of just, I want to be like successful. I want to do something in this life I have.
Yeah, I think a lot of the stuff you've done, and I see it is like you realize the importance of community as you do all that stuff, so you're like, oh, I need to, keep this being a thing. And even sometimes you don't feel also being like Hispanic, I sometimes don't feel part of my own community, sometimes there is that distance, with like my family members that are like in Mexico, and
Yeah.
so it's kind of like, well, if there isn't that community or enough of it, we're here to build that, to build a better kind of situation for all of us to be there for each other. So I really appreciate that. You've been doing that. And kind of, I know, like going back and kind of talking about cafe, what kind of what are the different kinds of work that cafe has been doing recently?
Yeah. So recently we had worked on Gabe's with the congressional district, flipping that for Gabe to be elected, which was a super revolutionary thing to happen, which was super cool to
Mm,
see that Doñana made such a difference in that. We have staff that's working on parenting issues in order to help parents advocate and get needs that they need met within the school system in our community. There's been a lot of gun control reform and a lot of different avenues recently we've been working on. We have a Rev Carolyn who works with us who's working a lot on like mental health, on how we can address that as a community, because we're all hurting and we look at the stats with mental health and mental illness and it's gone up. So kind of what does that say is us as a community? How can we reevaluate and build that, and what is missing, what is lacking? And I think those are the main things as of recently we've been working on.
And what are some of your hopes for the future in terms of the work you're doing?
I think is my hope is ultimately we're building this youth program is there's also going to hopefully be the opportunity to take some youth from New Mexico to DC to present with our national org and a federation we're part of, Faith in Action. And so to provide that opportunity to some young people, I think my hope is to see that kind of go through and have a successful youth cohort and provide that opportunity. I know the first time I ever like traveled somewhere was with Cafe. So I think that was like super cool as a leader and to be able to be in this position now to provide that to other young people is super dope. And so I think that's my highest hope. And I think we're having a regional training in June. And so I think to see more young people hopefully be able to engage a lot of young people in that regional training to really develop themselves, to build their resume, to make connections, to teach them different things, but also like what you're saying, to just find that community as well. I'd say are my hope in the terms the future work and getting more of a youth presence and youth voice in the work we do. In the past, Cafe hasn't really worked with youth specifically, and it's
Mhm.
kind of just been whatever young people want to get involved. And so kind of being able to head kind of mindfully leading that work to make sure we get that younger voice in so we don't have so we have people that are going into the community and they want to be engaged because they have a community that cares about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I've also gone to like DC and like Austin and like here in Santa Fe. So I'm also thinking I'm like maybe I've seen you and I didn't even know because like you know we're just passing by with the different
Yeah.
groups. But I no, it's really great like going to those things. So like I really push that for any youth that are listening to join Cafe in those efforts because it helps one kind of show that whoa, like young people care. You know what I mean? Because they have this view of like, oh, like they don't even know what they're talking about. But when you go in there and even if you're not, you're like, oh, but I didn't practice enough. It's okay as long as like from your heart say what's going on and they'll be like whoa what the heck like it's a really surreal experience especially as a young person where you feel like you're not taken seriously and going and being the person that's like I'm gonna set an example so that hopefully the next young people are taken like as seriously if not more.
Yeah, and I think like also, yeah, like what you're saying for like young people to listen is like to really remember like your own power and your own worth also is huge. I think I had to learn that a lot. I dealt with a lot of like just imposter syndrome being where I am in my career and like especially like culturally in my family I didn't really grow up with people that were in like public offices or were in these spaces and so like I didn't understand how they worked and I was really scared sometimes. And
Mhm.
so like I think is like we've all been there where you're just like, like I have no clue. Like this is purposely like made to make me feel like that. And I think just providing a new energy is so needed in our world. I think is just people authentically being who you are and taking up that space and being honest with it. I think even just in like my own work community, being like the youngest person there, they're always like, Alisa, you're like the energizer bunny of our office. And I was like, tell you, I'm like everywhere. And I think it brings a new spirit we need to this work and to advocacy in general, because it's going to be impacting us in the long run.
Yeah. And I know that we've we've been kind of giving advice, but just in case, there's a question that we ask most people is like, for any of the listeners, what kind of advice would you give the listeners, especially maybe even the youth, and maybe if you want to add on to like, oh, and to the adults, you know?
Yeah, I would say for young people is don't be scared to take the first move. Like to reach out and be like, I want to be involved, but I don't know how. Or like if you're like, I've never been a leader, I'm like not typically one to want to run for like student council, or like I don't really like I know like some people maybe at NMSU and they're like, I don't really fit in at ASNMSU or I don't fit in these spaces is like I think really cafe is like just a space for everyone and just a space to be yourself and to honor that dignity you have as a person and all gifts you bring to the table, no matter how qualified you may think you are, is like you are always overqualified for anything, probably sometimes. And I think
Right.
it sounds crazy, but like we second guess ourselves and we're like, I'm terrible at this. And it's like, no, you may be really good, but you just need to give it a shot. And so I think always like don't be scared of that. Don't be afraid to be in new spaces. I think also to ask for things you need to be in spaces of advocacy. I think often we just don't see enough young people. So even just being present or wanting to learn and wanting to be educated. And I think for parents is just like encourage your kids. Like I think even if you don't understand or you've never been in the world of government or policy or advocacy, I think for my parents, that was something pivotal that they did. It's like sometimes they couldn't always understand what I was doing, or sometimes they're like, you're crazy, you're just, or like I'll rant sometimes, and they're like, of course. Is I think that to know that they always support me and they always want the best and they always want me to achieve the next thing in my life that I care about deeply is pivotal. And I think that support for parents is tremendous, even if maybe you don't understand. Maybe you come from a different culture or you're trying to learn new things that are coming, is just that support for young people is immensely needed.
Yeah, I think that advice is great because I've, I think as we're young adults and like as we're like experiencing our own kind of identity even more, um, as being adults, it's like, we live in a very multicultural place, and it is true that we need to be able to even like if our parents don't understand some things, it is great, like you said, to be able to give that space to be like, well, I don't know about that, but you can learn it and you can, learn about that and be better at that. Um, but with like, for example, my mom also doing a lot of community work. Um, I grew up around like her doing that like all the time. And so I was just a little kid and going to this, and obviously as a kid you don't understand the importance of it, and then later I saw, dang, like what my mom does is like a lot for the community in terms of like just even talking to people is enough to grow a community. And now I understand it, and my mom gave me that tool to be able to be like, look, I know that I'm very like I do this kind of work, and uh it might not correlate with what you're doing, or it might be that she gave me enough tools so that I do even more than her. Like there's so many limitations that like um our parents, a lot of Hispanic kids' parents, especially if they came from Mexico, Guatemala, anywhere, and they came over here and they had the limitation of work, 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 and you go to school, that's all I got for you, and my advice is just go. And so I think we all have that of being able to just go and go. So I really appreciate that advice. That really hits me like personally.
No, yeah, and I agree because then like sometimes we get stuck in like cultural systems that I think we that is like also just like a much needed conversation too. Sometimes I think like even when I first moved out, I remember me and my mom had like just like a heartwarming conversation because she was like devastated. I was moving across town. I was moving 20 minutes
Uh,
away from my home house.
yeah,
But in like in my like in Mexican culture and Hispanic culture, like that's just not common. I'm the daughter, I stay until I get married. And
yeah,
so I think and it was like something too that it was definitely cool to have like in cafe. I had my organizer that I was working with at the time, and she was like, Alisa, I get it, like it's gonna be okay. And now even like I laugh about it with my mom where I'm like, she's not that bad, like you know what I mean? Because we want We want our people to be like future homeowners, future people that are able to do those things, but sometimes in our community we just don't realize how systemic those things are rooted.
Yeah, and we're not adults until we leave. Well, we're never gonna be adults to them. I think I think to my mom is like, yeah, no, like I was 18, I was still a kid to my mom especially. Then I moved out, then I moved back in for a little bit. I was a kid again, you know, like
Yeah.
so I definitely understand that. But yeah, like I appreciate your time. Um, I want to thank you again for all your advice. I want to thank you for, you know, being someone that I know is going to be super relatable to a lot of people like here. And I love your energy. You bring a lot of great energy. I see now what the other people in cafe we're talking about. I really appreciate it, and I'm just thank you for your time. Thank you for your thoughts around these important issues. More information about Café Acción can be found at organizenewmexico.org. Am I correct?
Yes.
Is there anywhere else, like any other socials?
Yes, so on our social media, so we have a Cafe Acción page and an NM Cafe page, as well on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. So feel free to please follow
Nice.
all of them.
So, and you can follow the lab at lablc.org. That's our website, and on Instagram at Learning Action Buffet. Well, we'll try to see about the TikTok thing because that sounds cool. So make sure to follow all of us and take care.